All right, today we're looking at Outlook and specifically at hope and imagination. I'm going to be telling more than one story. We're going to look at the theoretical aspects of imagination and hope, and then I'm going to tell a story about the woman on the right, which is the woman, what do we call her? Who is she? The woman with, yeah, or with the issue. Isn't that amazing? She doesn't have a name, just the woman with the issue or the blood disease. And then I'm going to tell the Syrophoenician. Then I'm going to tell the story of my mom, who's there on the left with my dad, and then of course that relates to me. All right, we're looking at story, imagination, and choice, and as you've been noticing, I hope, those are the three that I've been weaving through my discussions, and you'll get more of that later. Even rest relates to these, and we'll talk about that in a different connotation, different context. All right, so let's look for story, imagination, and choice within this text. Now I know it's there's a lot of words there, but when you look at the yellow, the green, and the red, which one relates to story, which one relates to imagination, and which one relates to choice? Anybody? Let's take story first. Which one relates to story? Yes, good, Jerome. When she heard about Jesus. Okay, so she's heard a story. That's what's brought her here. It isn't just a fact, oh, there's a man Jesus over there. That wouldn't have brought her. What kind of story? It was probably one that she heard. What's that? That's right, a story about Jesus healing. So when she heard about Jesus, all right, where do you see imagination?
If I could touch.
That's right. If I could just touch his clothes, I will be healed. And where do you see choice, of course, is in the green. She came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. So what I want to look at today is this whole combination of story, imagination, and choice is what the gospel is all about. Because we were talking about accepting Jesus Christ by faith. That's a story. And that's imagination, because we can't understand how a God can love us. We take that by faith, and that's a choice, right? So when story, imagination, and choice come together, there's just a huge shift that can take place in a life. Okay, so let's take this a little bit more slowly. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, Jesus, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. So we have a problem that's been ongoing. Now, I'm not going to stop and ask you all to be vulnerable here, because I'm guessing you all here have something in your life that has been going on for more than just a few moments. Something that you've struggled with for years, or you know someone who has. There's nothing quite like a struggle that is more than a day old. You have struggles that, when they last for a long time, become more discouraging. And just when you think you have found the right answer, my sister and I have a funny thing. When we call on the phone, we'll say, "What's the news?" So what's the news? And we laugh because we know that we don't mean the news that you might see on the 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock news or 10 o'clock news. We mean, so tell me something interesting. That's what that means. So what's the news? What we have discovered is that when we go to talking about our personal lives, it's all often the same as we've said year after year after year. Our struggles tend to be the same. We've also noticed that when we go to set New Year's resolutions, in fact, let me ask you, do you ever set New Year's resolutions? Anybody here? Yes? So what kind of resolution do you set? Does any? What's that?
Self-enrichment.
Self-enrichment. Jerome, how often have you had that as a New Year's resolution, would you say? A couple times. That's exactly what they've noticed in looking at the research, is that people who set New Year's resolutions tend to set similar ones every single year. When I saw that research, I thought, I'm going to go back and see what have my resolutions been over the years. And sure enough, I found going back year after year after year, the same resolutions. So here we have a woman that's been yearning for something for year after year after year, and that is this healing. Now, either through your own illnesses or by watching others, that when you're not healed, you begin to question why, which is interesting to me, because we know that God is not the author of illness, right? We know that. But you and I also know that when people get ill, one of the first questions they often ask is what? Where is God, and what else?
Why is this happening?
Exactly. Why is this happening to me? Now that's a hard question, because you want to say it has nothing to do with God. God didn't cause this. But that's often a question. So when we watch someone who's been subject to something for many years, it's often has made them discouraged, bitter. They have a lot of questions that aren't answered. They have often spent a lot of money on getting self-help books, on all these different things. So that little phrase has a big meaning. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors. I love the King James Version that says, she suffered much at the hands of many physicians. It's much more poetic. She'd suffered much at the hands of many physicians. And had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. So here she is, having that background. When she hears about Jesus, she comes up behind him in the crowd and touches his cloak. Now, she has been trying this for 7 years, or 12 years. Why is it that this time she still believes? Okay, so let's look at that. Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized the power had gone out from him, and he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" Now, we've often found that interesting. Why would Jesus, who seems to know most everything, why would he turn around and ask who touched me in such a context? And the disciples are asking the obvious question, you see all these people, why are you asking who touched me? But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and knelt at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. Okay, what happened right there in front of all those people? Talk to me. What happened right there? What?
It could have been a very embarrassing moment.
Okay.
Scary moment.
Okay. Right. And it could have been a scary, embarrassing moment, but she did, similar to the woman at the well, says she, what? What does it say? Knowing what had happened to her, came and knelt at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. What did she tell right there?
Her situation.
Yes.
For years.
Yes, her story. Here she pours out her story in front of all these people. Now, so when Jesus said, "Who touched me?" he knows this woman. Now, whether he chose as a human to have limited knowledge, or whether the story was that important, what matters is the whole story was told. He gave opportunity for that story to just pour out. Okay. He said to her, now this is what's interesting. This woman comes being nobody. In fact, we still refer to her as nobody. We call her the woman with the disease, the blood issue. Whatever we refer to her, we don't refer to her as the name that Jesus gave her right here. What is the name that he gave her? That's right, daughter. Now, here, let's look at that change. Here was a man with with miracles. That's a story. She comes up as a nobody, touches him, and she calls him daughter, to which she now is beginning to understand as being God, the Son of God, because he did in fact perform this miracle. So she comes as nobody. He's a man that may perform some kind of healing. She goes away having been called the daughter of the Son of God. And that's huge. That's a huge shift in this person. And here we have that healing again. Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. Be freed from your suffering, which is a different word than, if we go back, it says she'd been subject to bleeding. That's a disease, right? That's just an illness. What Jesus recognized her is her suffering. He recognized that larger story. And so he is talking about that larger healing again. You know, go from here. That bleeding that's just been stopped, that was a smaller part. But I want you to go and be freed of your suffering. That's right. Be freed of your suffering. Okay. Now let's look at a story, the power of a story. I love these pictures. You see it in my father's background is Native American or American Indian. And he teaches everything by story. And I want to share with you a kind of a funny one. I once asked him what he thought of someone that I went out with just a couple of times. And when I asked him that, he said, I happen to be at home, and we live in the country. My parents still live in the country, as you'll soon see. And he said, look at that cardinal. So I look out the window at the cardinal. Cardinals will peck at themselves in the mirror. So the cardinal is on the truck, on the red truck, interesting, and he's perched on the mirror of the truck, the outside side mirror, pecking at himself in the mirror. And I said, yeah, Dad, I see it. And I was used to my dad going off into stories. I said, but Dad, I want to know what you think about the guy that I've gone out with a couple of times. Well, look at the cardinal. Then it dawned on me. He was answering my question by asking me to understand that story. That there is the cardinal who's pecking at himself in the mirror, thinking it's another bird. So the cardinal is all there is. The cardinal's complete attention is bound up within himself. And I'm like, ugh. My dad is telling me something there, and it hurt. And I said, Dad, is that what you think? He said, I'm just saying, look at the cardinal. Now, that story stuck with me for a long time. Then when I got engaged to Gordon, my father wrote me a letter, and he wrote a story within it. And it was about two birds. And I'm getting this trend of birds, right? And he said there were two birds. And he said to watch them preen each other was the sweetest thing. And if you've seen I have parakeets at home, and when they preen each other, it is so cute. They're sort of, I don't know if they're getting the mites off of each other or what, but they'll just preen back and forth, and you just hear them sort of, how do you call it when birds make that sweet little, what is it? Cooing sound, yes, while they're preening. And so they're just so cute. And in his story, he talked about how sweet that is and how they take care of each other by that preening. Then in the second story, he said, or you have two birds that instead of preening actually peck at each other and fight with each other. And at the end, you only have one bird. I called him, I said, Dad, I was telling you about my engagement. He says, consider the birds. Every time Gordon and I have an interaction, I think of those birds. Are we the birds that preen, or are we the birds that peck? And my dad was telling me something there. If you preen, you'll have two birds that are very healthy. If you peck, only one bird will be left standing. Now, if he had simply said, as long as you guys take care of each other, you'll be fine, those words would have been long forgotten. But because he told me a story, I apply it over and over and over. Now, what does that have to do with hope and imagination and with outlook? If I had been God, quite honestly, and because I'm an academic, and I think if I had written the Bible, I would have simply written a code book. Do this, do this, do this, don't do that. But God's people wouldn't have changed as much as by this a book filled with stories, because of the reason I just told you, is that we remember stories, and they come into our hearts and our minds every time we start making choices. Okay. And what's also true is that we then share them with other people. We love to share stories. We're not so keen on sharing facts. So here you have, it's funny, the minute you say to someone, have you heard? They're right there. You know, it doesn't matter whether it's bad or good, shamefully. They're right there. And we start real early on taking those stories and imagining what they might be if this or if that, or in a different context. Okay. You know, Albert Einstein, he says, imagination is more important than knowledge. Imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited to all we now know and understand, while imagination embraces the entire world and all there ever will be to know and understand. Okay, now I wrote this small because this is not about the words. I want you just to sit back while I read you a story. Are you ready? Yes. Okay, and I'm going to come out from behind this computer because then I feel more like a story reader. I had called my father and told him that I was discouraged and that I felt like giving up at a certain point. This was some time ago, actually, several years ago. This is the story my father told. Now, he recently wrote it on his website so that I now have the story on his website. And I asked him if I could share it with you, and he said yes. One day I saw one of my half-grown duck hens flopping on the bank. I grabbed my big dip net and I caught her. When I picked her up, I saw all the webs and most of the toes on one foot had been bitten off by a mud turtle. The hens all look alike, so we never named them. But all of a sudden, it seemed like this little hen needed a name, so we called her No Toes. I put her in a pen where we could see her from the kitchen window. I gave her food and water, and she could eat the lawn grass through the wire-bottom cage. Occasionally, all the ducks would graze in the backyard, and when they saw her in the cage, they all danced around the cage and quack, quack, quacked. After that, they came back every day to check on her, and she improved enough to get up and quack back. When she stood up, I noticed she would stand on the bad foot and limp on what I thought was her good leg. And then I realized that she had sprained her good leg so badly, trying to free herself from the mud turtle, that she couldn't stand on it. About the time I thought she would be all right, she quit eating. I moved her cage to some new grass and I changed her water. She would not even try to get up. Several days went by and I knew she had decided to die. And I asked why. And then I thought the other ducks had not come to see her for days, and she was dying because she thought they had rejected her. I opened the cage and I picked her up. She was nothing but a handful of feathers. She didn't even flutter. I said out loud, and I can hear my dad saying this because he talks to animals, if you're going to die, you might as well die with your friends. I walked out on the dock and I threw No Toes as high as I could out over the water. When she hit the water, all the ducks swam around her, quacking just like they had when she was in the cage. When the welcome party was over, all the ducks headed out across the lake. No Toes just sat for a moment, and then she started to paddle. With webs on only one foot, she swam in a pathetic little circle. I'm not real big on crying, but this is one of the saddest creature moments that I've ever seen. I thought, I should have let her die like she wanted to. Then she stopped, let out 3 long quacks, and to my utter amazement, started swimming after the other ducks in a straight line. Very slowly at first, then quack, quack, she was on her way. She never grew much after her ordeal, but she mated, she nested, and one day, when I looked out across the pond, there she was, a proud mother of 6 little quackers, swimming in a straight line, with only one paddle and no toes. And I heard him say, consider the birds. Consider the birds. He didn't tell me what to do, but I knew exactly what I wanted to do after I heard that story. I thought, if that duck can swim in a straight line with no toes, I can do what I need to do. Now, the interesting thing was, I had asked him about that situation. In my life, as I'm sure is true with yours, you come to more situations than one where you simply want to give up. And that story keeps coming back, and it helps me imagine a different place and gives me hope that I can get there. So stories have that kind of power. They go over and over and over in your head, leading you to a place. And that's the power of Scripture, the power of story. So now let me ask you this. As I was reading that, and you'll notice that's why I put the words up here, because I didn't want to tell you or show you the picture. What kind of water did you see when I was telling you, reading that story? What kind of water came to your mind?
We saw the sea.
You saw a sea, all right?
Green pond water.
Green pond water. Pond? Blue with trees around it.
I saw a crest line.
You saw a crest line? Do you mean crest line up here? Crest line. So it was up higher. Okay. As you were imagining, was there a house nearby or not?
Yeah.
Yes? No? Yes? No? Was it deep water, shallow water? Deep? Okay. What kind of duck? A what?
White duck.
White.
Black.
Black. Speckled. All right. Now, do you want me to tell you how it really looked? No. Okay, we have a yes, we have a no. Those of you who say no, why no? Because there is a very specific reason why you would say no. Carol, do you?
It was just a nice story in my head. The grass and it was so beautiful.
That's right. Okay. If you say no, the reason is you want to preserve your story. Because my story just became her story. And if I tell her how it really looked, that makes her story mine again. But right now it's hers. And that's the power of imagination, is it becomes your story. She will reuse that story in ways, now that it's hers, that she won't do if I show photos of what it looks like in reality, or describe it. Again, the power of imagination. All right. Imagination develops by the age of 2. I'd like to compare a 19-month-old child with a 22-month-old child. It's really kind of cute. And it shows you the transition in children right about that time. If you give a little teddy bear to a 19-month-old child, and they have their little bear, okay, then you take the child, then you show the child the bear again, the same bear, getting wet. And then you show her the bear again, and you show her a dry bear and a wet bear, and you ask her to go to her bear. Which one do you think she will go to? The dry one or the wet one? We've got a bear that's the child, the teddy bear, right? Now, in the second scenario, you show the bear getting wet. Now, in the third one, you ask her to go to her bear. Which one will she go to? She'll go to the dry one, because she can't imagine that the water that was just put on the bear was the same bear, as her original bear. It takes imagination to get from bear 1 to bear 2. Now, when she is 22 months old, her imagination is starting to be able to link the two. And she can reason, well, that's my bear. You just dumped water on it, and now it's wet. So she can imagine the link between the two, and when you ask her to go get her bear, she'll go get the wet one, because that's her bear that's now wet. So imagination develops very early. When I was very young, I was not a Christian at the time. I suppose it wouldn't really matter, except that you might think that as a child the Bible might be a favorite book if you're a Christian. I wasn't a Christian, and this just happened to be my favorite book, The Secret Garden. What's interesting, though, is I forgot the entire story except this one line. It completely stuck in my head and in my memory. Where you tend a rose, my lad, a thistle cannot grow. Because in that I saw the story. We were gardeners growing up, and that's something I learned, that if you are tending your plants well, then you're not going to have weeds. You don't focus on the weeds. You focus on the tending of the vegetables. And I found myself applying that to a lot of different things. When things would come up and I would want to focus on the negative, I would hear this in my head: where you tend the rose, my lad, a thistle will not grow. Now, before I go here, I do want to say this. The imagination develops and is quite vibrant right when you're young. In fact, when I work with more middle-aged people and they're trying to decide, even younger people in their 20s and 30s, and they're trying to decide what they should do in a career, what I will say is go back to when you were between the ages of 6 and 14 and tell me what your dream was then. Because that's your truest dream. That's where you are the most free to imagine. When you get a little older, people start putting limitations on that, and they'll say, oh, you can never make money at that. No, you can't do that. Oh, we don't do that as Adventists, or whatever. But there is something in that early imaginative period that is very true to you and yourself. Okay, with that, let's look at this. As we age, we sometimes cease to use our right brains in favor of the more logical left side. Our capacity for imagination actually decreases. You would think as you get older, your capacity would increase. It can actually decrease. Why? Because we stop playing. Children play all the time, and they're using their imagination to create monsters and all kinds of things. But as you get older, people begin to suggest that imagination is bad or not helpful, and it starts pulling in. We stop reading. When you ask people, let me see if I can get this. The greatest thing that people say at their deathbed that they should have done is write a book. That's what almost everybody says. But if you ask people, how many people, and I won't ask you, I don't want to embarrass you, have read a book in the last week? Almost no hands go up. And then you extend it. How about in the last month? How about in the last year? Now, I was sitting in the doctor's office recently, and there was a woman there who is a literature teacher, and I asked her what books she was assigning to her college classes, because I love literature and I wanted to know. She said, well, they're a lot smaller now than they used to be. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, young people these days will not read a long book. Now, that means in 10 years, we may have people that only look at cartoons. It's very sad that we're becoming non-readers. It's very scary. Why? Because TV or anything that shows you what to think takes away your imagination. So we're watching more TV, film, and other visual arts. They tell us what to think. We're becoming too busy. We don't have time to imagine. We grow up and leave childish things behind. I found these pictures to be actually quite sad. You see up there in the left-hand corner some children that have completely left their toys, and they're just mesmerized by the TV, as are the other children. And here we have an adult saying, it's a book, use your imagination. And the child says, what's imagination? Is that an app? By the time they are 16, children will have spent 10,000 to 15,000 hours in front of the TV. That is more hours than they will spend in school. The average home has a TV on for 6 hours and 44 minutes a day, 3 times the average of the 1970s. Now, you might say, well, sure, it's on in the background, but people aren't really watching it. Well, that's part of the problem. Our focus is all diverted. TV decreases brain beta waves and increases low alpha waves, so it very much has a hypnotic effect. Watching TV is like staring at a blank wall. So you have these things moving, and you think, well, these are things I'll remember, but in reality, what's happening is you're put into a state where it's somewhat hypnotic, and it's actually not as easy to remember. A solitary fantasy can totally transform 1 million realities. Maya Angelou. Logic will get you from A to B, but imagination will take you everywhere. All right, now I'm going to leave this here for just a few seconds, and in a minute, in those few seconds, you'll know why. Tell me what's happening as you look at this slide. They're turning. Okay, I'm going to move it quickly. Are they really turning? Of course they're not. You are imagining that they're turning. But here's what's interesting. If I leave it there long enough, you will actually, for those of you who see it turning, will actually get sick. Why? Because your body is responding to your imagination as if it were real. Now, I'm going to say that one more time because it has huge effects on the kind of things we watch, especially on TV. When you see something, your body is responding as if it were real. And you can't stop it, because if I put this back, you can sit here and say, it's not turning, it's not turning, it's not turning. But you can't keep it from turning. Do you see what I'm saying? So your imagination is taking you to a real place. Your body is responding as if it were real. Okay, so let's look at this. You've got a lemon. And I'm going to ask you to pick up the lemon. Everybody pick up the lemon. You know what I'm going to do, don't you? All right? Everybody got your lemon? Okay. Now put it to your mouth. Yeah, what's happening? You're salivating, right. All right. Now some of you are able to be disciplined and say, this isn't real, these are just my fingers coming to my mouth. But when you imagine that that's a lemon, you will salivate because your body is responding as if it were real. What's that? You can smell it, yes. So it's not, yes, your body's responding in every way as if it were real. Okay, so we're back to this imagination and hope. She went up and touched his cloak because she thought, I will be healed. She had the imagination, and we'll push it to suggest faith because it's a spiritual imagination. She believed that she would be healed. Okay, now let's move to hope. Hope is to wish for something with the expectation of its fulfillment. And that's a bit different there because with hope, you expect that it is actually going to happen. It's a feeling that what you want is likely to happen. It's desire accompanied with expectation or by expectation. By believing passionately in something that does not yet exist, we create it. All right, we've talked about Erik Erikson. And remember I talked to you about what that first stage was, trust versus mistrust. And that if you are able to learn to trust well, the kind of trust that can trust without completely giving up yourself, trusting in something else, then the virtue that's developed is hope. Okay, now I'm going to get into just a little bit of brain chemistry here, because I want you to see what's happening when your brain hopes. When you take someone who is ill and they simply believe that they are getting better, their body, their pituitary gland specifically, produces endorphins and encephalins that are chemicals that actually alter the messages that go to the brain. Okay, it intercepts the feeling of pain from reaching the brain. So you might be feeling pain, and an example I can give is in my own, you all know, I think that I had a bike wreck on Friday. When someone called me just yesterday and said, how are you doing? I said, great. And then I realized as soon as I said that, I actually did feel better. Okay, there is a reason for that. When I am responding positively, those endorphins, those enkephalins are increasing, and it actually intercepts the feeling of pain that would be going from reaching the brain. It's a kind of psychological painkiller. And it's also thought to improve the immune system, because if the body is not preoccupied with pain of an illness, then it might be able to fight off the illness itself. It's also what they think might be happening in the placebo effect. You know, they give you a pill that's not really a pill and you get better. That's not just the fake pill. Your body is actually responding as if it were a painkiller. It's actually putting things into secreting chemicals that would be secreted if it were a painkiller. So imagination can be very powerful. On the other hand, hopelessness can cause a secretion of cholecystokinin. It's a chemical released in the central nervous system that has the opposite effect of endorphins and enkephalins. It helps the messages of pain to the brain, thus increases one's hopelessness and suffering. So here's the bad news. If you are hopeless, your body secretes chemicals that actually cause you to be more hopeless, which causes you to be more hopeless, and on and on and on. If you have hope, your body secretes chemicals that actually help you hope, and on that goes. So there are patterns that get developed by the chemicals that are being secreted by your attitude and your outlook. All right. You know the story of the woman with the issue. We've read it. And now we're just going to go through the statue as you could see it out here on the front. That's right. I went around with a camera. It's on a cloudy day, so they're not the best pictures. And I just wanted to look at the various aspects of her. This is her going up to him, and she's, of course, trying to get to that garment. And this is a picture full on in her face as she's reaching out to touch him. This is her touch. This is Jesus turning around to see who touched him, and then I took that picture full on. And this, I love this picture because from a certain perspective you can see their hands just almost coming together there. And again, from another perspective, the hands are touching. And the smallest result, this is the smallest result, is that her bleeding stopped. The largest result is that her suffering would end. Why? Because she's probably going to be able to think in a different way. And that's the whole point. All right, and finally I'm going to tell you the story of my mother. My mother and I took a trip together across the United States from when I did my PhD at Emory to coming back to Loma Linda. We loaded up the car and had things brought, and then she and I brought the car. And I thought, what a great time to get her personal story on tape. And so we had the most fun. She would drive and I would tape, or I would drive and she would tape. But every time she told a different part of her story, it would go on this tape. The sad part is once we got here, my car was broken into and those tapes were stolen. And that's very sad for me. But I want to tell you a story that happened on that journey. We stopped at the place where she was raised. It's called Tate, Arkansas. You can hardly find it on the map. It's so small. Her mother found that community in a magazine, found the land in a magazine. Her mother wanted to get away from the community because her father had been divorced and she was embarrassed and didn't want people to know, and in shame bought this land from a magazine and moved the family sight unseen to this land in Arkansas. So my mother we get out of the car and my mother is showing me that right over there, well, here's what's funny. On the way to the land, my mother goes, oh boy, things have really changed. I said, really? I said, Mom, it can't have been much different than this. It's still, she goes, well, it's a gravel road now. It used to be dirt. I mean, that's how still unsettled this area is. There's no, street lights. It's just still a community of Tate way back in the woods. So we're out of the car now. She's pointing. She said, now that's where the house, she started struggling. I said, do you mean would have been? She said, yes. And then she turned to me and she said, get me out of here. Now, my mother has the same genes that I have. I think I got them from her. And that is, she is the most cheerful person I've met. Honestly, she's just happy. And I've never heard her just, get mad, really mad. She's just a cheerful person. When she did this, get me out of here, I was like, who is this person? I got in the car and I held the tape over to her as I had always done so that she could speak. She said, get that out of here. I don't want to say anything right now. And she just, get me, I think I was the one. I can't remember now whether I was driving or she was driving. All I know is we went down the road. And we were driving. I said, Mom, what's going on? At that moment, she told me a story of being raised under extremely difficult circumstances that I had never heard before. Now, mind you, this is a woman that when my sister and I talk about my mom, we do this. We use little, I'm going to come over here. We have little motions we make. My dad is like this and I'm like that, but this is my mom. We have a person walking and they fall over and they get up and they go that direction, fall over, get up, go that. In other words, nothing gets her down. And so I remember once at home where while they were on vacation, someone at the church did away with their Sabbath school. Just canceled it. Now they're in a little country church, and for whatever reason, their little Sabbath school was just canceled. And I thought I could see my mother's disappointment, and I said, Mom, I'm getting mad, I'm going to do something. She said, we'll see. I said, well, Mom, aren't we going to do something? Aren't you going to say? No, she said, we'll see. Now, this is we'll see. You encounter a roadblock, you turn, we'll see, and you go a different direction. We'll see, you go a different direction. So you're always traveling. If there's a roadblock, you simply turn and go a different direction. So her we'll see meant we'll see what happens when time, give it a little time, and I go a different direction. A couple of years later, I was talking to my mom. I said, what you doing? She said, I'm preparing for Sabbath school. I said, what Sabbath school? She said, my Sabbath school. I said, oh, you have a Sabbath school? Yeah. Her will see said, just wait. Something, something will give way. A different direction will mean a different outcome. I asked my mother about Tate. And I said, Mom, I never knew this about the background and all this. And I said, what are you going to do with all that? What do you think she said?
We'll see.
That's right. We'll see. What that meant is I'll go a different direction and we'll see. We'll see what happens with a different perspective, a different moment in a life. I honestly believe that at the end when she dies, that from the casket I'm going to hear, we'll see. Okay, what am I saying? I'm saying Tate is a story. It's not just my mother's story. It's all of our story. We have a Tate. Everyone has a Tate. This little place that isn't quite right, that isn't quite perfect, that wasn't the gift that everybody else got in their life. This thing that is that place that when you encounter, you just can't believe. I can't change the direction of the wind, but I can adjust my sails to always reach the destination. We all have a Tate. The places that define us and confine us, the control of others who do not have our best interest in mind, and they are always there. The limited thoughts of those who have no imagination, the place where there is no hope. But as I hope I have conveyed today, hope and imagination go together both psychologically, theologically, and physically in a way that comes out of choice. We can make that choice for a different outlook. And that's what we saw in the woman who touched the hem of Jesus' garment. If she had not made the choice to trust the story that she heard and to put into action, a different action, she would have never heard from him, go and experience no suffering, right? So she was part of that equation. It wasn't just Jesus. She had a part to play in that. If I could just touch, realize my own value, explore a different future, collaborate with God, create a different world, if I could just touch, I will be healed. It is that story repeated over 1,000,000 times that helps people create all the things you see in this world, the books in this room, the programs that have been developed. Someone has said, if I could just touch. And when they have that hope, all those endorphins, those enkephalins start producing that physical response that actually helps them with that physical outcome. Right? Okay. Thank you.